Hello and welcome to Wrestling at Random. I'm Jeremy Deemer.
And I am Adam Summers.
This is the podcast where every week we review a classic pro wrestling event from a streaming service.
And that classic pro wrestling event here on season 2 of Wrestling at Random can be any episode of weekly pro wrestling television that we were able to find and dump into the randomizer. And boy, oh boy, the randomizer lived up to its name, its moniker here, as we have an episode of TNA Impact from 2005 from a very, this is a sort of limbo period for TNA and their television situation.
Yeah, in May 2004, TNA ceased doing their weekly pay-per-views, had moved into doing a television program from Universal Studios, Florida, broadcast on Fox Sports Net. And that's the classic era of the Fox Box.
Yes, the Fox Box. I loved it with the time limits and the names of the wrestlers. A very sports-looking broadcast from a production standpoint, at least.
Yeah, September 11th, 2005 was TNA's Unbreakable pay-per-view, which we will hear a lot about during this show. This was one of the
and we'll see a lot of graphics for it.
Yes.
They had one very low-res graphic, and they got their money's worth using it on this show.
So the other piece that we hear a lot about on this show is that TNA is moving to Spike TV, and they're going to be on Spike TV. So the question was, September 1st, where were they? Because apparently the Fox deal had expired in May of 2005. So this show, September, the May 2005 contract with Fox Sports expired. So TNA was, like you said, in limbo here. And so they were waiting for Spike TV. So from this period, they ended up just airing their television shows on the internet.
And boy, oh boy, again, to use that phrase, the internet. This show was, during this limbo period, it was made available via BitTorrent and also via Real Player and on Urban America Television.
So you were required to download a virus to watch this show because
and when you did it, you also got a misnamed song from Napster, I think, as a bonus.
From LimeWire too. Yeah, that's
yes.
So this is we are just before they land on Spike TV, but here we are. We're dropping in to the Impact Zone at the soundstage here at Universal Studios, and we are dropping in on Random Weekly TV. So it's super important for a good video recap package. And the good news is we got one here to open this show. I felt instantly like I knew what was going on.
Yes, this was, in a lot of ways, this was so different from the first ever TNA, then NWA TNA review that we've done on this podcast. If you go back and listen to our episode reviewing NWA TNA weekly TV pay-per-view, number 8, I believe it was, that was a crazy, nonsensical show that they did not do a good job of explaining to us where we were, why we were there, what was happening, what was going on. Here, this show starts off, and
first of all, they spent way too much time explaining the Dup Cup to me in that show, and and they're lucky I ever watched a TNA show again.
I feel like that Dup Cup segment was longer than this 1 hour weekly TV that without commercials is 45 minutes here for TNA Impact. The show opens with the voice of God, the James Earl Jones like sounding, where he says, instead of saying this is CNN, it's this is TNA. The new face of professional wrestling. They weren't that new at this point, but they were new-ish, I guess. And then the first man that we see on this broadcast is the franchise, Shane Douglas, not in wrestling gear, but in a fittingly, I thought, a yellow TNA polo shirt. Those were his colors, yellow and black, back in the day in ECW. And he tells us that there is a battle between Larry Zbyszko and Jeff Jarrett over the fact that the TNA Executive Committee has given Rhino the TNA title shot instead of Jeff Jarrett. And now, I as I'm watching this, I start having flashbacks to that NWA TNA number 8, because it's people are mad at executives over being passed over for
not
title
people.
shots.
Jeff Jarrett specifically. Yeah. It's the same guy between these two shows. I was about to scream reverse discrimination again because this is the exact same storyline.
If you don't know what we're talking about, go back and listen to that podcast where we talk about that TNA weekly pay-per-view, because it has by far the most offensive storyline or angle we've encountered on either season of this podcast, as Jeff Jarrett claimed reverse discrimination as to why Ricky Steamboat, the NWA representative at that time, had not given him a world championship shot. But here, Larry Zbyszko is the man standing between Jeff Jarrett and the now TNA title.
Swap Zbyszko for Steamboat from that same episode. We're in the exact same story. And
so I was scared as this show started. I did not know where we were going to be going. But yes, then we get a long video package that is very effective in laying out the story, where basically Jeff Jarrett is going around backstage and telling everybody that when they get to Spike TV, Jeff Jarrett has to be the champion. And he is trying to convince Rhino, who is going to be getting the title shot against the NWA World Heavyweight Champion, or the TNA World Champion. They kind of use the phrase interchangeably here. Raven. That was the match coming up at Unbreakable. Rhino versus Raven for the world title.
Yeah, I immediately know who the champion is, which is great. Like, I know Raven's the world champion. I had no idea I had no knowledge of TNA 2005 coming into this show. So I'm immediately told Raven's the world champion. Rhino says, nope, you can have the shot next after me. We get a pull apart with Rhino and Raven. Rhino's able to break away from security to hit a gore on Raven. This package was put together. I really wanted to see this. I was into this feud right away. The monster Abyss has been turned loose on TNA until he gets a title shot as well. This is all in the same video package.
He has been set loose by the former Sinister Minister, Father James Mitchell. Here, not with the disciples of the new church. He's not talking about the Ark of the Covenant or the blood of the Audad. None of that is happening here. They've reined all that in, and instead he's just the same awesome Sinister Minister cutting cool, creepy promos that he did in late stage ECW.
And then we see Sabu showing up to attack Abyss and Rhino. So, much like when we watched WWE 2001 and we were like, wow, they hired everybody from ECW. Now we're watching TNA Impact 2005 and I can say, wow, they hired everybody from ECW.
Yes, they hired everyone from ECW after said ECW wrestlers left the WWE. Basically was the situation here. But then we also realized they didn't just hire everyone from ECW. They also hired everyone from the WWE, because not only do we see Jeff Jarrett talking to TNA original and great man Monty Brown, he's also talking to Billy Gunn, who is known at that point as Kip James. And the gist of this backstage promo is that he's basically saying that TNA originals like them, who Billy Gunn certainly isn't, need to stick together for some amorphous, vague reason that we don't really understand. The best part about this long video recap is that it closes with Jeff Jarrett in white slacks and a button-up shirt with multicolored vertical stripes, standing on the top of one single large rock, holding the NWA World title outside.
TNA Impact coming to you from Universal Studios in Orlando, Florida. And
this, by the way, I do need to jump in, Jeremy. Yeah. I have been in the Impact Zone.
Now, this is news. Tell me about what it is like to be in the Impact Zone in Universal Studios.
Well, it was actually very strange in the sense that, for one, I was on a family trip. This was 2007, so a couple years later, and I didn't even realize that TNA's Turning Point pay-per-view was going to be happening while I was there. So I was able to get free tickets and I went. And the thing that was so strange,
you were able to get free tickets.
Shocking.
Continue.
That's the subtitle of every TNA pay-per-view, free tickets. But it felt so much like the worldwide tapings that I had been to in 1994 at MGM Studios at Disney World, which was also on a sound stage. Very similar situation. It's a relatively small sound stage. It held about, I think, 900 people, just under 1,000. And it was, my recollection is that it was similar to those old WCW tapings at MGM, where they, you would have cheer signs and boo signs. I vividly remember Jeremy Borash most of the show standing just off screen and in very animated fashion trying to get the crowd to boo and cheer at the right times. And then, in between matches when they were doing video packages, he would constantly be on the mic saying that whoever the loudest fan is tonight will get to go backstage and meet the wrestlers. That was their big shtick to get people to cheer.
The studio looked a million times better than the Nashville Fairgrounds, which we saw in that previous episode we discussed. Let's talk about the six-sided ring for a second. That's another visual that you noticed right away. The six-sided ring I was familiar with from seeing Mexican wrestling, and that was something that I had seen before. But this was one of the first companies in the U.S. to
the first major company really to do this, and it was one of their things that was, as they were attempting to differentiate themselves from the WWE, it was one of their immediate visual differences was that the ring was six-sided. And I knew this, like I had this knowledge, but I still coming into the show had completely forgotten that they had the six-sided ring. So that was an interesting sort of adjustment to make when you're watching the shows as well. And I'm sure you've read a lot of stories through the years about how, for wrestlers who had never wrestled in a six-sided ring, particularly guys who are coming from the WWE, there was a big adjustment period.
Yeah, and then we hear the sweet sounds of our lead announcer, Mike Tenay, as he tells us about the Chris Candido Memorial Cup. I loved Chris Candido in ECW. He had just recently passed away pretty close to when this episode was airing. Yes,
he passed away just a couple months before this show happened. He had gotten injured at TNA's Lockdown on April 24th, 2005. He fractured his leg horrifically, his tibia and his fibula, in a steel cage match teaming with Lance Hoyt against Apollo and Sonny Siaki. He had surgery. Days later, he fell ill. His condition worsened. He collapsed and was rushed to the hospital, was diagnosed with pneumonia, and died very shortly thereafter at only 33 years old, which is just, it's crazy to think he was only 33 years old. And yeah, Chris Candido, on top of, like you said, a guy who was very entertaining in ECW, I saw Chris Candido a lot in IWA Mid-South as he was getting his comeback going before he ended up back in TNA. And so, yeah, this was a shocker. Chris Candido was not only a very, very good wrestler, but he was a guy who had a great reputation, working with younger guys, whether it be on the independent scene or here in TNA, which is what led to them doing here in September of 2005, the Chris Candido Memorial Cup.
So we get brackets for the cup here. So we
get a snapshot of graphics. This made me feel like the Cruiserweight Tag Team title graphic that we got in the Greed pay-per-view recap we did in season 1. That felt like a long lingering shot on a graphic compared to this.
Yeah, I paused it, but good news, yes. I wrote it down. Shocker and Sabin defeated Diamond and Bats. I don't know what a Diamond and Bats are. Simon Diamond?
Yeah, it's probably Simon Diamond because he would have been he was there around that time.
He was an ECW guy, and they have all the rest of them.
I'm guessing it's Simon Diamond and Mikey Bats.
Okay. BJ James and Riley lost
Well,
to Truth and Dutt. Now,
it's BG James, who was Road Dog.
the Road
And
Dog,
boy,
Jesse James. Yeah.
we do not see a lot of him on this show, but boy, he made an impression on me, even though he was not physically here. I will have a point on that later.
I don't know who his Riley partner was, but they lost to Ron the Truth Killings and Sanjay Dutt. So Truth and Dutt face Shocker and Sabin in the next round, which will be on this show. The bottom half of the bracket, Sean Waltman and Alex Shelley defeated Abyss and Shark Boy. What is this, Battle Ball? What is with these teams? Now,
yes, that's actually, when you say what is with these teams, I was thinking the same thing. I was thinking it through this bracket. I was thinking it all through the first of the semifinals that we're about to talk about, and a portion of the way through the second semifinal, which comes up later on this show.
Explain it.
They finally explain that what the situation is that, I guess, in honor of Chris Candido and how well regarded he was working with younger wrestlers, that it was a blind draw, but every team would have one veteran and one young up and coming wrestler. So it's Battle Bowl with conditions.
Yes. Now, Kip James and Williams, Petey Williams, I'm guessing.
Yes, Petey Williams of Team Canada, the originator of the Canadian Destroyer. Yes.
Lost to Conan and Lance Hoyt. Yes, we're going to get some Lance Archer on this show. I'm young Lance Archer. I'm very excited here at Lance
Very
Archer.
Different.
So Conan and Hoyt will take on Waltman and Shelley in the next round. So we can confirm in 2005, Lance Hoyt's tramp stamp was there. So it predates 2005. I was surprised.
It had not been covered up by that like I don't know, desert cemetery scene that's on it back now, which he's done a good job covering it up, but it was here in full effect. And yes, this second round match, the semifinal match, it is Sean Waltman, the former X-Pac, who is wearing X-Pac gear that they just took the X off and it just says Pac.
Yeah, they were calling him Six-Pac a couple times.
Sean Waltman. He looks exactly the same. He's not aged at all at this point. And a young capri tights wearing Alex Shelley, who this was the first of many guys on the show that I was like, oh wow, yeah, Alex Shelley was in TNA at this time, and I was seeing him like every couple weeks in IWA Mid-South live at the same time. I wrote down Sean Waltman and Alex Shelley. This is delightfully random. That was my take on this team. Mike Tenay tells us that he was surprised at how well this team worked together in round one. And as you said, their opponents, Conan, wearing all black jeans, black shirt and bandana, and Lance Hoyt wearing a skull cap and long leather pants. And like you mentioned, his lovely tattoos. At this point, we should mention that the broadcast team for this show, it is the same two men that anchored the majority of the broadcasts of the NWA TNA weekly pay-per-view number 8 that we reviewed earlier on in this season. It is Mike Tenay and Don West. Thankfully, no Ed Ferrara.
Oh, thank God. Yeah.
Don, we'll get into it. But I'll just say these guys were great on this show. Mike Tenay was not screaming at us like he was on that previous show. Don West had found his groove. They were awesome.
What an improvement from 2002 to 2005. There's in those 3 years, and not consistently working together. There was a lot of like there's weeks on and from the pay-per-view format to this format. It's impressive how cohesive of a unit and a broadcast team they are, and how it seems just like Tenay was like enough of the nonsense. I'm going as straight and serious as I can, and I'm not sacrificing my credibility. And he really did a great job this whole show.
Exactly. And Don West, it was great because he was not as yelly and screamy every moment, but he retained every bit of the Don West charm that we talked about before, like this charismatic outsider that really didn't know a whole lot about pro wrestling, but just fell head over heels in love with a lot of the stuff, particularly the X Division stuff. there's a lot of great Don West moments on this show, including his excitement, his sheer glee over the possibility that K-Dog, as he said, may tell us what's up. But then K-Dog does not grab the mic, and Don is just sad.
Conan opens the match. The first move of the match was, as TNA described it, a rocking horse cradle submission move.
Yes, this was a reverse pendulum of pain that Jason Jett / Easy Money utilized, and it's sort of a disturbing visual. This was not as creepy, and yeah,
but it's a weird first move of a match.
It is, but Conan is an odd wrestler. It's also noteworthy that Conan was still like in great shape here. He was still jacked. He could still move. It's always weird because you kind of forget when guys, it was post WCW, guys were floating around, but they hadn't really gotten old yet. And Conan was kind of in that mix.
No, while Conan wasn't old, he was so slow when he's hitting the ropes. His movement, getting across, the 6-sided ring, you got an extra step in there for some of those, and he wasn't moving great. Like you could tell that this was that he was going to break down here. He was
not broken down yet. Like his hips weren't shot. He was not completely physically shot, but there wasn't necessarily a ton of pace with him compared to other luchadors anyway, like in his prime. But yeah, he was not. It was noteworthy here too, or is noticeable when he's in the ring, with guys like Alex Shelley, and even 2005 Sean Waltman.
Yeah, Hoyt gets in there with six-pack Sean Waltman, and Waltman goes for a Bronco Buster in the corner, which is one of my all-time least favorite moves in professional wrestling.
Yes,
it is. It's. I don't think there's a worse move that's had as much longevity as X-Pac's Bronco Buster.
Well, and Rey Mysterio grabbed onto it. And, we've seen he still does that to this day.
Yeah, it's still not great. Yeah, no, it's never something that I enjoy seeing.
No, before we get to anything else in the match, I also wanted to mention that at one point, Sean Waltman hits a spin kick. That's the one thing he was doing awesome in this match. Tons of spin kicks. They look great every time. And then Don West is talking about here in 2005, Sean Waltman turning on Jerry Lynn. And I had a flashback to running home from junior high school 14 years earlier to see Jerry Lynn wrestle the Lightning Kid, Sean Waltman, in a 2 out of 3 falls match. Also, there's a weird spot right after that where, we see Waltman hit his short running leg drop, which is awesome. But he does like a flare strut for some reason before he did it. Weird.
Yeah, Hoyt countered that Bronco Buster with a boot to the face. Kip James, like you mentioned, the former Billy Gunn, runs out. He's on the apron. Hoyt knocks him off the apron. TNA then tells us that Kip James is mad because Hoyt got the pin on him last week. In
this Candido Cup, Crazy Partners, Battle Bowl with Limitations tournament.
Waltman then sneaks up behind Hoyt, gives him a low blow, hits the X Factor for the pin.
No. Mike Tenay calls it, quote, the face jam.
That's right.
The first, but not the last time he calls a move on this show, the face jam. And it's at this point I realized that Mike Tenay, as lead announcer in TNA, the face jam is his Tony Schiavone flying body attack.
Yeah, this was a 0-0 match here, but Shelley and Waltman are in the finals.
Yes, it was the match was fine. It was short. It was fun to see like these guys mixed up together, like to see Alex Shelley teaming with X-Pac, and he's in there with Conan. I also was amused by like after this heel finish happens, Tenay just sort of like, you could see him having his arms like just sort of shrugging his shoulders saying, whatever it takes. That's what he says. And then we go to the back.
For Jeff Jarrett.
Yes, Jeff Jarrett backstage. And before Jeff Jarrett talks, we see Ron the Truth Killings and BG James, the former Road Dogg, and they are for some reason just dancing. And they're wearing generic bootleg football jerseys.
Yeah, this wasn't a great look for older dudes.
No.
Probably it's sketchy at best for age-appropriate dudes. Yeah.
One man looked comfortable, and it was not BG James.
So Jarrett tells those guys that TNA management is out to get them and get him, and people are being fired.
He says it started with me, and now it's company wide. He says we're all on the list to be released or fired. And then he says, you guys just got back together, and now they do this, whatever this is, we don't know. And then he says that TNA management are deceptive con men, which it's actually hilarious because he's telling on himself.
That's right. Conan, who Don West affectionately calls the K-Dog, he comes up.
Calling him K-Dog.
He comes up. He's in this group with James and Truth. They're a group together.
This group, we'll get to more details about this group later. They are known as 3 Live Crew.
Ugh.
Get it? Because 2 Live Crew, but it's 3 guys. So it's 3 Live Crew. And crew, I believe, was spelled K-R-U.
Yeah. And we are 20 years past the heyday of the 2 Live Crew. So timely.
Very, very timely. Conan did have a great line where Jarrett says, if we don't stick together, Conan immediately interrupts him and says, we doesn't include you. I love that. And then they just argue because everybody argues with everybody in TNA.
Yeah, and he was mad too that these 2 guys are talking to Jarrett while he's out there losing his match.
And then BG is like, well, he has a point.
Yeah, and then Truth and James tell Conan that Jarrett's making good points, and Conan walks away in disgust.
Well, then I also flash back to, was it 1995 or 1994 when BG James pre-Road Dogg was the roadie for Jeff Jarrett in the World Wrestling Federation, and then they had the whole angle where Jeff Jarrett was lip-syncing the song that the roadie actually sang. So there's layers upon layers here of stories. I am saying that, attempting to say that with a straight face. Yeah, we don't have video here, but
X Division champion, the Fallen Angel, Christopher Daniels, versus from 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, Shark Boy.
One of my least favorite wrestlers ever.
I missed out on Shark Boy here, so I don't know what's going on.
You missed out on 2 things. You missed out on seeing Shark Boy every week in TNA. You also missed out in the early 2000s on having to see Shark Boy on all the independent wrestling shows that I was going to. Because when I would go to MCW and other shows in the Chicago area where they would bring in, big name guys like, big name indie guys like Loki or Christopher Daniels or, Red and the SATs. They would also bring in Shark Boy. And oh my God, this gimmick, the shark style mask, the horrible gear. He'd do the shark fin. Everything about him every name was shark themed. And like you said, he was from 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. Just the ultimate, small time lame gimmick.
No, it looks like a 9-year-old create a wrestler.
Yes.
Down to the details of the gear as well. Yeah. Don West says, seriously, he's dead serious about it. Shark Boy is a tough opponent to prepare for when you only have Samoa Joe and AJ Styles on your mind.
Yes, because coming up, this was, like we said, this show is 2 weeks before, actually 10 days before the TNA Unbreakable pay-per-view, which would be, I don't know if headline, but the biggest match historically on that show was Christopher Daniels defending the X Division Championship versus Samoa Joe and AJ Styles, a match that Dave Meltzer and the Wrestling Observer would go on to give 5 stars to. It was the only TNA match that ever got 5 stars, and it's widely regarded as one of the best matches of the 2000s and by far the greatest match in TNA history.
Daniels has Shark Boy in a wrist lock on the mat. Shark Boy reaches up, looking to grab some hair to get out. He touches Daniels' bald head as Daniels just smiles, shakes his head no. That was really funny. I enjoyed that spot.
Yes, this was your classic, underdog borderline jobber against the high-end champion. It's a non-title match. We also have Mike Tenay running down the lineup for this show, which we won't spoil it, but he calls it, quote, a solid lineup, unquote. And that's an interesting choice of words. Like you said, he clearly was not in his 2002, I'm going to hype everything as though it's the greatest thing ever. He's being honest with here, and he's telling us that for the remainder of this 1 hour show, we have a solid lineup of professional wrestling in store.
Yeah, and you don't need to sell somebody. They've already downloaded the virus needed to get this show. They're already watching it on their real player, so it's already pixelated and tiny, and so they're already invested. You don't have to sell them. They're not going to turn it off.
Very, very good point. At this point, Shark Boy, the babyface, rakes Chris Daniels' eyes. Hits a drop toe hold, then he backdrops Chris Daniels over the top rope, hits a pescado, which I'm going to call it that. That's the official name for it, and he's a seafaring creature, so it's definitely a pescado. And yeah, they're brawling around the ringside area, and this is where I note again something I had forgotten about, that in the Impact Zone, the entire ringside area, there were no chairs. It was standing room only. That was standard. Yes, that was standard operating procedure. Everything around the ring was standing room only. I think on the hard camera side, meaning the side that the hard camera was located on, they would have 1 or 2 rows of like seats for VIPs, sponsors, that sort of thing. But otherwise, the other 3 sides of the ring were was standing room only. I did not do that. I was smart enough to get bleacher seats in 2007 when I was in the Impact Zone.
Shark Boy, after a few chops on the outside, rolls Daniels back in, but Daniels punts Shark Boy in the head as he tries to follow him into the ring.
At this point, Mike Tenay calls Shark Boy Sharky.
Ugh. But Daniels beating on Shark Boy until Shark Boy he tries, he makes a comeback. He hits a drop kick, punches in the corner, a neck breaker by Shark Boy. He goes to the top, tries a missile drop kick, but Daniels just swats him away.
This was great. He just very casually swatted him away. We cannot say, or at least I cannot say enough great things about Chris Daniels here at this point in his career and in this match.
Oh, this is prime here. This is prime Chris Daniels.
He had been a journeyman for a long time. He was in the Chicago Indies in the 90s. We were both at the first ECW show in the Chicago area, where maybe it was the first, maybe it was the second one, but Chris Daniels was on an ECW show wrestling super crazy. He got tryouts everywhere. It never took, but he found a home and made a career for himself here in TNA in the X division.
Daniels slams him down and screams, "I'm gonna kill you."
This was great. This was also around this time during this match where Mike Tenay tells us that it will be Sabu versus Abyss coming up at the Unbreakable pay-per-view, and Don West, all caps, yells, "All right!" And then he tells us how long he's been waiting for Sabu and Abyss to wrestle each other again after their classic matches that they apparently had before. And this was a perfect example of just Don West being so enthusiastic, just infectious enthusiasm for the product here from Don West.
With Shark Boy down in the ring, Daniels jumps to the middle rope, then jumps to the top rope, hits the BME, the best moonsault ever, for a near fall. Why is Shark Boy kicking out of this move? Come on.
I have like a full line of question marks. I could not understand how that happened. This was a beautiful, beautiful best moonsault ever from Chris Daniels here. I had zero expectation or inclination that Shark Boy would be doing anything other than staring at the lights for the count of 3 here.
I literally wrote it down and had to delete it. I wrote the best BME for the win. No, delete, near fall. Why is Shark Boy kicking out? This doesn't make any sense. It's not like he picked him up or anything. He literally kicked out.
Legit kicked out. It did bring us a great moment though, where after that, Daniels tries to pick him up and he yells, "Stay down, Shark!"
Yes, you should have stayed down, Shark. AJ Styles then comes down to ringside. Quick fashion corner here. AJ has on a white polo shirt with blue and gray stripes on it and a pair of jeans. Now, AJ is so cool in his polo shirt. He's not playing golf. He's not business casual. He's cool because he's got the collar popped. It's up. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I believe he might have had one of those like rope necklaces around as well, around his neck. The one thing I did appreciate about TNA, well, a couple things. First, they copied the WCW idea of using knockoff versions of very popular music, using public domain versions. Chris Daniels' music here was a knockoff of The Beautiful People, the Marilyn Manson song. So that was entertaining. The other thing that I enjoyed was that, as you mentioned here with AJ Styles, when wrestlers who weren't wrestling were going to come out for a segment or were going to come out and interfere, oftentimes they would be in their street clothes. They wouldn't be wearing their gear. That I love that. That makes more sense. So that was a nice touch here.
After the distraction, Daniels turns around, gets rolled up by Shark Boy. Small package for the win. Shark Boy with the upset because of the AJ Styles distraction, leading us to the three-way, which you mentioned would be a 5-star classic. So,
well, just think about how much better it would have been if Shark Boy would have rightfully gotten his spot in getting a title shot, and if they would have made that a 4-way match.
No.
Note sarcasm emoji.
The Candido Cup tournament continues. Chris Sabin and Shocker are out first. Now, when I saw them on the tournament bracket, I was hoping it was Shocker from Mexico, and it was. I used to watch the CMLL shows at the time in like 2000, 2001 time frame. And AAA would always, they'd be on the Univision wrestling block right after CMLL, but I really enjoyed CMLL the most, and so I watched a lot of that, and Shocker was on there all the time. So, so super cool to see him here. This is where Tenay explains what's going on with these partners. We've got it. Everything makes sense, and we get Lucha starting out here with Shocker and Sanjay Dutt, and I love it.
Hold on. Before we get to that, and I'm with you, I love that. Before that happens, the team of Ron the Truth Killings and Sanjay Dutt make their way to the ring. There's a lot to unpack.
I skipped. I had a note to talk about the song, but go ahead.
Well, yes. Before we get to that, though, and I hope you can find that and overlay that onto this podcast. Work on that. If not, that's fine. There'll be other opportunities. But first off, the Truth is dancing like only Ron the Truth Killings can as he's coming out the entranceway. And then Sanjay Dutt tries to match his dancing, and that's fantastic. But that's burying the lead. The music. It is not just Ron the Truth Killings music. This is the music of 3 Live Crew. And what happens all at the same time is in this music, the Truth is rapping. Conan is yelling Orale over and over and over again. And BG James is yelling over and over and over again, "Oh, you didn't know!" You know, from his classic Better Call Somebody catchphrase in the WWF. The like incongruent nature of these 3 things happening at the same time in my ears, I just lost it. I had to pause the show. I was just cracking up, dying laughing here.
Yeah, because you're like, hey, all those things that Adam just described sound like they'd be an awesome song. No, it turns out.
Incorrect.
It turns out it didn't work. Didn't work. That is a terrible song.
In a strange way, it did work, just not the way they intended.
So, Shocker and Sanjay Dutt in there. We get some lucha starting out here. I loved it. Killings and Sabin, they're in. They go back and forth. Good power slam by Killings, and he tags
Chris Sabin. I just have to jump in because Chris Sabin, for my money, and this jogs me.
This is a young Chris Sabin here.
This is young Chris Sabin again. I had started seeing him in IWA Mid-South in 2004 when I started going to their shows very regularly. Chris Sabin was the most underrated wrestler, you know, whether you want to call it in TNA or on the independent scene or both in the mid-2000s. He was so smooth. And that's one of the things I noted about all these guys, whether it be an Alex Shelley, a Chris Sabin, a Sanjay Dutt, these guys that were just off the indie scene and were really still in the indie scene. they were so great because they were high flyers, they were quick, they were smooth, they could do submissions, they could, come off the top rope, but everything they did, there was an edge to it, and there was a sort of an acceleration or intensity that it didn't just look like they were going through the motions. Like, they did not look like guys fresh off the indies.
No, we had a really fun sequence here where Dutt throws Sabin to the corner. He leaps onto the second rope, kicks him in the head. As Sabin stumbles out of the corner, another kick to the back of the head, and he follows it up with a super kick. And I'm like, oh, that was a fun sequence. Not done. Dutt, then all the way to the top. He misses his corkscrew dive off the top rope. He's able to roll through, but an enziguri counter by Sabin and allows him to tag Shocker back in. I highly, you're talking about the smoothness of Sabin, absolutely here. And Sanjay Dutt, he was quick, he was solid in everything he did. I really enjoyed this.
Absolutely. And there was even more to that sequence than you're saying. There were a few things in between the Phoenix Splash and the enziguri. It was very, very impressive. And one of the things to note here is that, like, these guys were getting a crash course education, all of them, I assume, in their early to mid 20s. They were wrestling, as I mentioned, on the indies. They were wrestling in TNA. And then they were going, all three of these guys that we're talking about, Alex Shelley in the earlier match, Chris Sabin here, and Sanjay Dutt, they were regularly going over and competing in 0-1 in Japan, wrestling, great junior heavyweights like Ikuto Hidaka, Minoru Fujita, guys like that. So they were learning every time they went out there, different opponents. The best way to learn and become a great wrestler, is getting that experience. So it was showing through here. The only disappointing thing at this point in the match from Sanjay Dutt was that he tried the power drive elbow, and unlike Loki, being able to pull that off close to the level of the Great Muta on that previous TNA show we reviewed, this was not that.
Definitely not that. Shocker and Sabin, they work over the leg of Dutt. Sabin then, he carries Dutt to his corner, tags in Shocker, does his dive over the top rope into the ring, dropping the elbow. Classic Shocker stuff here, loved it. He goes for a power bomb. He holds him up. So Shocker with a power bomb. He goes, holds it, picks him up to do it again, but Dutt counters using his leg behind the head of Shocker to drive him face first into the mat.
Yeah, this is like an even cooler version of You Can't Powerbomb Kidman.
The R-Truth, then he's in. He runs wild. Sabin with a kick picks Truth up in like a fireman's carry. He's holding him over his shoulder.
Yeah, he was going for the cradle shock, which was his finisher, where he would get the guy in like a fireman's carry position, cross the legs like figure four style while I was holding him over, and then sit out into like a Michidoku driver.
So while Truth is in the fireman's carry position over his shoulders there, he spins around and hits Shocker accidentally with Truth's legs. So like picture Terry Funk with a ladder in ECW, turning around and hitting everybody. This
Very
was
good.
This was like that, and so Truth then rolls up Sabin, but Shocker is able to break up the pin. The communication breakdown. We start teasing dissension here between Sabin and Shocker. After that, Dutt tags in, hits a crossbody off the top onto both Shocker and Sabin. Dutt then charges in. He gets caught with a double flapjack. Mahi Scrawl cradle by Sabin on Dutt gets the pin. Shocker and Sabin advance to the finals, where Sabin again apologizes profusely for hitting Shocker with Truth's legs, as they appear to have mended fences as the match ends.
This might have been the first and only time in TNA history that like partners didn't get along, but then they didn't turn on each other. Like they actually just agreed, okay, we can work through this and move on to the next deal. I love the finish as well, and that it was a double flapjack, and then Sabin just hits the Mahi Scrawl cradle and gets the win. It wasn't a finisher. This was a really fun, cool match. The other thing I wanted to note briefly about this match, Killings looked 100 times better here than he did 3 years earlier.
Oh, yeah.
In that match with Ken Shamrock on that weekly TNA pay-per-view. He had improved dramatically. He was able to hang with these three, pretty internationally seasoned wrestlers. He looked every bit as good as the rest of them.
Next up, From the Serengeti, Monty Brown.
Yes, I exclaimed when I saw that we were going to be getting a Monty Brown match, because what I thought we were going to get was one of those great Monty Brown squashes from the Impact days, Goldberg style, where you just pound somebody and kill them. We'll see if that's what we get. What we do see is a bit of fashion corner here with Monty Brown. He has the bright rubbery red bicycle shorts type of trunks with red boots. And he is wearing this amazing, full body length leopard print robe as he wipes his nose across the ropes to put his scent on the ropes, because you see he is a tiger or a lion. He's the alpha male.
Yeah, let me tell you, early 2000s Deemer classic. If he had seen that robe that Monty Brown had on, he'd be tracking that thing down. You
would have been wearing that with the rockabilly sideburns.
100%. That was right in my wheelhouse. His opponent, Sonny Siaki, who's accompanied.
Sonny Siaki. 1/3 of the Flying Elvises 3 years earlier was not expecting to see him on this show.
That was the last time we saw him. He was the overconfident, the cocky member of the Flying Elvises. He's accompanied by Apollo. And so these are two dudes from that 2002 TNA show that we reviewed. So go back and listen to that one.
I was hoping Apollo was going to get in on the being angry about not getting a title shot scene for old time's sake.
No, he did not look like he was ready for a title shot.
He did not. It appeared as though he was in a different phase of his career 3 years later.
So Brown's sent into the corner, and he explodes out of the corner with a clothesline, a high drop kick. Monty Brown has so much energy and intensity. I love it.
And charisma. He just explodes off the screen. He was one of the, even here when he was not getting the push that he would get shortly later, he was one of the must-see guys, one of the reasons that kept you coming back to TNA outside of the X division. It was hoping that Monty Brown was going to get that, that sort of top guy run. We're glossing over something though, Jeremy. Fashion corner. Sonny Siaki. We talked about on the WCW Greed pay-per-view episode late in season 1 of this podcast about how Kid Romeo, his character was basically kind of a bit different, but a lot of ways like a Rock ripoff. Here, Sonny Siaki, it is a Rock tribute act. He is literally wearing the same boots, the same knee pads, the same haircut. He is in the same shape, just slightly shorter. His trunks have the same design on the back. I was taken aback here.
Yes, the Kirkland's version of The Rock. Siaki is to The Rock as ice cold Mike Austin was to who I saw at a indie show in Hammond, Indiana.
Hilarious.
That's what he was to Stone Cold Steve Austin. So
yes, he is he's not even the Mr. Pibb. He's like he's the Dr. Thunder to Dr. Pepper here. It is a sight to behold.
Yeah. So all right. So where are we with Siaki?
How about Monty Brown getting a hell of a drop kick? As at that point we hear Don West
such a high drop kick. Absolutely.
Yes. Don West recapping the vaunted Kip James Monty Brown feud.
Siaki with a kick followed by a nice neck breaker, but that's when the aforementioned Kip James runs down. He nails Apollo on the outside. Siaki then hits a sloppy tope on James.
Before he does that, though, did you notice he takes his elbow pad off and he acts like he's going to go for the people's elbow? But instead, he dives to the floor on this dime store suicide dive onto Kip James. At this point, we finally get our money's worth here with Monty Brown, as he just appears as a flash from left to right across your TV screen out of nowhere and just murders Sonny Siaki with a pounce on the floor.
Yes. So while Siaki is brawling with James on the outside, on the floor, the other side of the ring, that's where Monty Brown, he's sneaking around and then just runs and appears out of nowhere and hits a pounce on Siaki. Adam, is Monty Brown my favorite wrestler and I never knew it? Because I didn't watch any of this period of TNA, and holy cow, at this point in the match, I literally wrote, Monty Brown might be my favorite wrestler.
Monty Brown is the guy that, like, if there weren't so many other aspects of TNA for so much of his time period that were so off-putting that people just didn't stick with it, he would have been so many people's favorite wrestlers favorite wrestler, I should say, because he was, for all the reasons we talked about, he was fun. So great. He was fun, charismatic, hard-hitting, entertaining pro wrestling. No, he wasn't Dean Malenko. No, he wasn't Rey Mysterio. But that's not what you want out of Monty Brown. You want this crazy, jacked up, charismatic guy just pouncing the hell out of people. And he very rarely disappointed on that level.
Yeah, so the referee apparently just throws this match out as the bell just rings. So Brown grabs a chair, puts the top of the chair against the throat of Siaki, and then pushes Siaki's head down, ramming the chair into the ground, into the throat of Siaki.
Did you have flashbacks to
crushing his larynx? Absolutely. I immediately yelled, crushed larynx.
Maybe that's what made him your favorite wrestler that you never realized. He took you back to your childhood.
Monty then starts beating on Apollo in the ring. Brown whips Apollo toward James, who nails Apollo in the head with a vicious chair shot. I was
saying, why are BG James and Kip James? Why do they both have the same last name?
But aren't
they did have a team. I have this vague memory that's sort of wafting in and out of my brain right now that they were a team in TNA called the Voodoo Kin Mafia.
Ugh, was this before or after the 3 Live Crew?
It might. Honestly, I don't remember. I'm thinking
the VKM, the Vince McMahon trivia. Yeah,
so clever.
That is clever stuff. Now, I was not expecting this level of violence when the introductions were done for this match, but wow, they were about to do the throat thing again to Apollo, but Lance Hoyt runs down for the save. Brown makes fun of Siaki's throat injury as he's going up the ramp. I want more Monty Brown.
Yes, absolutely. He is a great man, and it was on display here in full effect. We then go to another video feature promoting the Abyss Rhino Raven storyline. So they're pushing this really hard. It's another. Some of it's repeated, but the centerpiece of this is a great promo from Raven, where he says it is a well-known fact that the single greatest hardcore match in wrestling history was between himself and Rhino. He talks about the shopping cart spear, the kitchen sink. And at this point, I'm going crazy because, yes, we just reviewed that show late last season on Wrestling at Random, where Raven and Rhino had an incredible WWF or WWE, whatever it was at that time, hardcore championship match.
I literally wrote, holy crap, he's talking about the match from Backlash 2001 that we reviewed in season 1 of this podcast, and I was there live in attendance. Go back and listen to our review of that show, and that match specifically, because it was great. He's not kidding. It was one of the best hardcore matches I've ever seen.
You would think that this was like just promotional hyperbole from Raven here. But no, from the strictest definition of a hardcore match, meaning like a WWF or WCW hardcore title match,
or Dub
you're
Cup.
not going to find any better than that. It was better than the Dub Cup. You're right. Raven, he was accurate here. This was better than the Dub Cup. It's a great promo. One of the better like late stage Raven promos that I've seen. He talks about that he likes pain. He may be weird and eccentric, but he doesn't think that he can say the same thing about Rhino liking pain. He then says that he is, quote, a human cancer and he will eradicate Rhino. Great promo.
Yeah, you might be a man beast, but I'm a human cancer. I will eradicate you. Quote the Raven, nevermore. They had the camera was in tight on Raven. who was sitting and nonchalantly. This was classic Raven stuff here, but it was really good, really fun promo. And again, I'm into this feud. I'd like to see more. So
definitely.
What I don't want to see more of: Jimmy Hart leading out the Young Bucks out of the tunnel. No, wait, these guys are the Naturals.
Yeah,
they're the World Tag Team Champions.
I had a recollection of the Naturals because, again, if you're a regular TNA viewer, which I was not hardcore, I was not hanging out on the TNA Mecca forums, but as someone who was constantly looking for something other than the WWE to watch, I was TNA adjacent at this time point. And the Naturals, long running tag team in TNA, I believe even going back to the weekly pay-per-view era. I had no recollection, though, of them being managed in 2005 by Jimmy, the Mouth of the South Hart, who, other than the fact that he was wearing a very boring suit, was the same Jimmy Hart you've seen your entire life. But this was one half of the NWA World Tag Team Champions, Chase Stevens, in singles action. His partner, Andy Douglas, accompanying to the ring.
I'm impressed because on closer inspection, I immediately deemed these guys boring. These guys will be very boring. One of them is Chase Stevens, and he's the one who's going to wrestle this match.
Yes, this is most times. It's a natural A and natural B. It's sort of what this is, but I did have a vague recollection of them. The thing that I was most happy about, I don't know if you looked closely, those NWA World Tag Team Championship belts, I'm 99% sure those are the NWA World Tag Team Championship belts that from back in Capital Combat 90 days. These are the same belts that Doom held high over their heads in Baltimore that night. Those beautiful belts with the blue strap, same title belts.
Yeah, and correction, we're contractually obligated to say Capital Combat 90, the return of RoboCop.
Yes, I'm sorry. Yes, Jim Hurd is setting this order right now.
So Chase Stevens' opponent is accompanied by Wildcat Chris Harris. It's Cowboy James Storm. They're a tag team called America's Most Wanted.
Yes, they were the most decorated team in TNA during this time period. Many-time tag team champions. And most people, I think, they know James Storm more from his Beer Money team. Was it with Bobby Roode?
Bobby Roode, yeah,
exactly. Yeah. So that's the team that everybody remembers. But this was sort of the forerunner of that, and I'm definitely glad that it was James Storm here in this singles match because he's the better of the two by far. Don West has a great line where he kind of confuses himself, but it's charming. He says, these two teams just can't get along no matter how hard they've tried. And he said, or I don't really know if they've tried hard at all to ever get along. Longtime rivals. And we're told that at the upcoming pay-per-view, it will be the Naturals, America's Most Wanted, Team Canada, and whoever wins the finals of the Chris Candido Cup in a 4-way match for the tag team championship.
So these two start out fighting, rolling on the mat, trading punches. No.
We have the Don Fry Takayama pride spot here with the double, both guys throwing punches at each other in the clinch. Then they go back and forth on the mat, and good intensity to start.
On the outside, Storm sends Steven face first to the concrete, and we get Tenay again calling it a face jam.
Yes. We do, and this is a completely different move. This was not the X Factor. This was the flying two-handed hair bulldog that Grandmaster Sexay would do before. That
Scotty Too Hottie
before he did the worm. That's what happened here on the floor. Definitely not the X Factor, but it's just the catch-all face jam.
Yeah. So Storm charges at him, but Stevens moves. Storm goes crashing into the guardrail. Not as insane as the last TNA show where we saw Malice take out a poor woman in the front row.
No senior citizens were harmed in the filming of this match.
Stevens follows it up with a suplex on the ramp. After a commercial break here, we're back in the ring.
Well, first we get Don West explaining what happened during the commercial break, which is great. He's like, you missed it. And then he tells us about the series of moves that culminated in a Hurricane Rana. Hearing Don West say a Hurricane Rana is always fun, but a Hurricane Rana that was brutal. And I don't know if he was saying that it hurt or it was poorly executed, but either way, it was entertaining commentary.
Storm puts Stevens upside down in the Tree of Woe, drop kicks him in the face. He runs and tries a baseball slide, but Stevens with a sit-up. So Storm crotches himself on the bottom rope. Stevens then he goes for a moonsault off the top, and James Storm did a great job getting over to catch him, as he was not very accurate at all on this moonsault. Great job by Storm.
It was that moonsault where, your opponent is on the ground. It's a stand, you're standing on the top rope, you moonsault off, your opponent is standing as well. But no, that's a very good point. That Storm, this could have gone very poorly, but if you weren't paying attention closely, you wouldn't even noticed what you just said, Jeremy.
Stevens with a sunset flip attempt, but Storm rolls through, gets up, kicks Stevens hard in the head, nearly taking his head off.
Which it was preceded by, the way, you said sunset flip. No, this was a second rope sunset flip, which is almost as egregious as a top rope sunset flip. I hate that move. I've explained why in previous episodes. You're basically like just missing a top rope somersault, and then that's supposed to not hurt, and you're supposed to be able to grab your opponent's legs and pin him. I like that Storm rolled through, because that move should always fail.
Storm on the top. He gets pulled off by Stevens. He yanked his arm, pulling him into almost a sit-out powerbomb.
Yes, this is a move. God, why do I even know this? This is a move called the Iconoclasm. Shuma, formerly of Dragon Gate fame. Yes, that it was that move. Very well done, actually. At this point, I noted that the Naturals were, or at least Stevens was better than I remembered him being. Like he did not have charisma. He looked like a roadie for Motley Crue. But as a wrestler, he was perfectly acceptable.
Yeah, I mean, he's just a zero. I mean, but totally fine.
He was fine.
He's totally fine. He's a fine wrestler.
Guy. Like, you would never dream of ever putting him in a meaningful singles match other than to build to a tag team match. But as a tag team guy, perfectly fine.
Series of reversals. Stevens hits a Death Valley driver, gets a 2 count. Storm with a series of headbutts, but Stevens off the ropes hits a crossbody. This is like a collision type crossbody. Good impact, pun intended.
This is where, if Jim Ross was calling it, he would scream and talk about a car crash on I-95.
Chris Harris and the other generic natural guy argue outside the ring. Both men hit each other with super kicks. Harris then...
It's an awesome spot. You're underselling this double super kick spot. This is not easy to pull off. They each hit each other perfectly at the same time with super kicks. This was fantastic. What was not great was moments earlier when you talked about those headbutts. I had very little complaints about the production on this show, except for when it felt like Kevin Dunn grabbed the control room for about 10 seconds, and we had a ton of shaky camera zooms in and out as those headbutts happen.
No, we had that on a few corner 10 punches earlier too. And we talk about the production here. The reason I'm not, it was perfectly timed, but the camera angle wasn't great to pick up them hitting each other with the super kicks, and the timing was there, but it was really, it didn't feel like, hey, this was the important finish of the match, based on how it was filmed. And we get the double knockout here. Harris points across the ring. The ref turns to look at the natural dude outside the ring, Douglas.
Andy Douglas.
So the ref turns to look at Andy Douglas. This allows Harris to then roll Storm on top of Stevens. Ref turns around, counts 3. Both men still knocked out. Storm does not realize he's won. Him and the Wildcat, they celebrate their victory. Jimmy Hart is livid.
Jimmy Hart is livid, but it's at this point that I remember that Jimmy Hart is involved in this match, because Jimmy Hart comes out to the ring with the Naturals. Then he is a complete non-factor. You do not notice that he's there for this entire match, and then he just appears out of thin air in the ring, and he's angry.
We're told next week we'll have Samoa Joe in action, and Raven teams with Rhino against Sabu and Abyss. Sounds like a fun go-home show for the pay-per-view.
Raven and Sabu versus Rhino and Abyss, I believe. But either way.
Raven teams with Rhino against Sabu and Abyss. That is correct.
I thought it was Raven Sabu as a team, but I could be wrong. Either way, it's 4 dudes that are going to kill each other. Samoa Joe, and I'm thinking, man, I'd like to watch that show.
Yeah, it seems like a good, fun go-home show for the pay-per-view, as this was the penultimate show for that pay-per-view. And there was quite a few matches. What was the best match for you?
I would say, and I enjoyed the main event. I thought it was really good, and I loved the finish. I thought TNA and Don West were great on the call on that, but to me, the second semifinal of the Candido Cup, the Shocker and Sabin versus Truth and Sanjay Dutt, I really enjoyed that.
Yeah, I had that down as my favorite match as well. However, I did say first I wrote down Monty Brown because he was my favorite thing on this show, but the match itself wasn't much of a thing, but Monty Brown was my favorite thing on this show. That match was my favorite match on this show. So,
well, I think for when we're reviewing weekly TV like this, a favorite thing or a favorite segment is every bit as important as a favorite match.
100%. Yeah, my favorite segment by far was Monty Brown.
Yeah, so a favorite performer, a favorite moment, and yeah, I would agree that by far the standout character, the standout wrestler, the standout performer on this show, the guy that after you spent 45 minutes watching this, you would remember the next day, was without a doubt Monty Brown.
Worst thing on this show for you?
Oh, well, having to see Shark Boy, although like that was fine. I would say like there wasn't a lot that was
there wasn't
bad.
A lot that was offensive. No,
nothing that was offensive. I would say the worst thing really was just having to see Jeff Jarrett do the persecuted Jeff Jarrett angle again, because I've seen enough of that, and I sort of have I don't know, my tolerance for that is really low. So I would say that, but even that was not terrible.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to say it's still the Dup Cup from the 2002 show. I'm still mad that I had to watch that.
You're still
3 years later, I will still hold that against TNA. No, there wasn't anything too offensive. I mean, I think the opener was kind of a nothing quick match, but Shark Boy was not great. There's some not great things, but Jeff Jarrett by far is always he was off-putting in all of those segments, especially rehashing exactly the same angle too, and I will hold that against him as well. So with that, we've wrapped up an Impact show.
We have. This was a perfectly acceptable way to spend 45 minutes. It was really, when you have to dig pretty deep to find, particularly, I don't know, in the 2000s, to find a TNA show that really did not have anything that insulted your intelligence. No. And I would say that this show fit that bill. Like, it was an easy to watch, simple hour of pro wrestling. You had some decent action. You had a few really good characters, and it did its job, because I really wanted to see the go home show the following week to see that tag match. The opening video feature made me more intrigued than I ever would have imagined I would be by that angle. And then, you're getting that 3-way X Division classic coming up on the pay-per-view, which, granted, if you're coming into this not knowing, and you just hear that those 3 guys are going to be wrestling each other, you would be thinking it was going to be a great match.
Yeah, I still want to see that. Absolutely.
The fact that ended up being great was not a surprise.
No. And, Don West and Mike Tenay as announcers, I was never confused. They caught me up on every single thing that was going on, so I never was out of the loop for too long. So they did a great job as well.
Yeah, for sure. I would not mind if the randomizer gives us more 1 hour Impact episodes from around this time period. Again.
I feel like
I would not have expected that when the randomizer pulled this show a couple days ago.
I feel like we're playing with fire if we ask the randomizer for another one after we got a decent TNA Impact. Right. So with that, if you want to know what the randomizer is going to pull next, make sure you're following us on Twitter at WrestleAtRandom. The same thing for Instagram. Every single Thursday, we will post on social media what that week's episode will cover. And then every single Sunday, make sure you're subscribed because the new episodes will come out and you can get all of the subscription information. We're available anywhere you find podcasts. The entire back catalog of this podcast, all those links are available at wrestlingatrandom.com. So make sure you subscribe. You make sure you tell your friends about this podcast. Make sure you tell your wrestling fan friends. Make sure you tell your friends that used to be wrestling fans about it. There's a whole season 1 back catalog. I bet they can find something. Make sure they're subscribed so they can hear all of the new episodes also right when they come out.
Definitely. Tell your lapsed wrestling fan friends about it, and just tell your lapsed friends about it. They may want nothing to do with you, much like pretty much every tag team partner in the history of TNA eventually feels about their partner at some point. But they may be a wrestling fan, and they would appreciate hearing about this podcast.
And with that, we're going to wrap it up. Adam, thanks for joining us.
Definitely. Thank you, Jeremy. We survived an episode of TNA TV without having to watch another Dub Cup. I consider it a victory.
I want to thank everyone for listening, and we'll talk to you again next time.